a great
No,
audience
no,
here
no, but
today.
believe it or not, the camera would pick you
Pick it
up,
up.
standing there. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first Auto Show Live program on Friday, brought to you by the Toronto Star. My name is Norris McDonald. I write for the Wheels section, and I'm delighted to welcome as my guest here this afternoon a man who, if you watch these streaming videos or watch the YouTube channel, is no stranger to this stage. Andy Manahan, the executive director of
the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. We represent contractors and people that build our roads.
Say that fast 5 times.
No thanks.
I'm sure there's got to be an acronym in there somewhere that can make it somewhat easier. Our subject today, and I find this absolutely fascinating, is, and all you have to do is walk around this auto show here in the North Building or over on the various levels of the South Building. Every automaker doing retail business in Canada is here, with the exception of 2, but we won't talk about them. And everybody, all of them have either an electric car, an all-electric car, or a hybrid on display. There's no doubt about the fact that the electrification revolution is on track. And that then creates a problem for municipal, provincial, and federal governments. When you and I buy a liter of gasoline, more than 50% of the cost of that 1 liter is taxes that goes either to the city, the region, the province, or the federal government. And if we're all plugging in, or we just have a pure electric hybrid, or hybrid rather, where is all that tax money going to come from? And that's what we're here today to talk about, Andy. You have been doing some research. Others have been doing some research. You know this subject cold. Number one, is this going to create a problem? And if so, what can we do about it?
Well, thanks, Norris. That's a great lead-in. I first started hearing about this issue from the U.S. because they have something called a Highway Trust Fund. And a former Secretary of Transportation in the U.S., Mary Peters, said in 2008, relying on the gas tax is like relying on cardboard to keep the rain off your head. The longer you use it, the less effective it'll be.
Right.
So we started asking these questions because, of course, a lot of municipalities and the province relies on gas tax revenues to build roads as well as to maintain them. So we first commissioned Harry Kitchen, economics professor at Trent University in Peterborough, to do a study for us in 2014. And he said, just as you just said, there's a lot of trends right now where we're seeing EVs and hybrids, definitely more fuel efficiency in all the cars if there's still fuel. And that's going to have some negative impacts on the gas tax revenues.
Well, and it can't help but have. You know, it's not a matter of, is it going to happen? It will happen.
It's already happening.
And, you know, and the thing is that this is one of the selling points of, pardon me, EVs and plug-ins, pure electric battery hybrids, is that we don't buy gasoline in the volume that we have previously. And governments work all this into their budgets, and you know how it is with governments. They're going to get it from us one way, or they're going to get it from us another. You have done some research. There are some states in the United States that have started to experiment with answers to this.
Well, can I first tell you what was very surprising?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, please.
So compared to the report we did 5 or 6 years ago and the one we just released last November, the decline in those revenues was happening even faster than we had projected.
Anticipated.
So it is falling like a stone. The numbers out to around 2040 are, on average, on a per capita basis, 599 liters per driver, per vehicle out there. The number from 5 years ago was closer to 1,100. So that's a hell of a drop.
That is a heck of a drop. Now, when we were sitting down in the green room, as they say, I was giving you my personal feelings about this, that there might be other jurisdictions in the world where it might take a generation or two for people to accept this electric revolution. Canadians were different. You know, our old empire loyalist DNA that's in all of us, we do what the government tells us to at some point. And the government is saying electric is the way to go. And in fact, although only 2 of the provinces subsidize electric cars today, Quebec and British Columbia, as you know, Ontario did, but that's changed.
Yep.
But the feds will give you $5,000 to, you know, subsidize this revolution. My fear is that this is going to happen so quickly that, number one, the infrastructure is not going to be in place to handle all of these electric cars, and we're going to overload the system. And number two, you talk about the fact that revenues are dropping significantly. I think they'll drop like a stone, personally.
Right. Yeah. So we don't know exactly when that tipping point is going to be.
Right.
But I would say that despite the fact that Canadians may be followers on the issue of automotive manufacturing and directions, we really do follow what's happening in the U.S.
Right.
California kind of sets the trend, but there's other big states like New York as well.
Right, right.
So whatever Canada does, we can't go against the flow.
Right.
And if governments are saying, for example, with respect to we have to reduce our emissions, this is, you know, the Paris Accord on climate change and all those sorts of things, transportation is a big part of that carbon footprint. Represents in Ontario about a third of all emissions from the transportation sector. That's cars as well as trucks.
Right.
So if governments are saying, you know, we need to be on track to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions footprint, and EVs is the way to do it, that's one thing we're going to see. Certainly the Ford government doesn't have the incentives anymore, and I believe in the early days of their administration they were tearing out some of the EV recharging stations, but I understand now they're starting to put them back in. As well, some governments, for the fleet operations they have, are going all electric.
Right.
And so at their depots and yards, they have plug-ins for those vehicles as well.
Well, when the show opened a week ago today, Navdeep Singh, or Bain rather, who is a federal cabinet minister, announced, I believe, 8 or 13, I can't remember exactly, but anyway, a number of millions of dollars to establish even more EV charging stations on the highways, so that you don't have to worry about going from Newfoundland to British Columbia anymore. Of course, we'll just wait and see what 1,000 of these things lining up for one charger at a rest stop down near Kingston will do. But that's you know, in the future.
I mean, I have faith that, you know, we're going to work on the technological side of it. I think the battery development is accelerating rapidly, so those sort of technologies will get us farther, so that so-called range anxiety won't be as bad. And hopefully there will be more of those kind of charging stations, so that we don't have those lineups where people are, you know, waiting.
Well, no, absolutely. And, you know, I've talked to any number of people who've always said, well, they'll figure it out, and they will. You know, probably because they'll have to figure it out.
Out of necessity.
You get pushed into it. But be that as it may, it doesn't matter whether it's electricity. I got to bring the conversation back to what we were talking about. The fact of the matter is that we're talking about government revenues here, and the revenues are declining, and they're declining because of electrification, but also because the automobile manufacturers, particularly the ones who are serious about this, you know, the amount of the carbon footprint of an internal combustion engine is now much less than it was even 10 years ago. And, you know, the way they're going, it almost could get to a point where there's hardly any released into the atmosphere and the environment. So it doesn't matter whether it's electrification or the finely tuned engines, the amount of gasoline that we're going to purchase is declining. And so let's get back to the best way to recover that revenue. Because again, you know, everybody's saying, oh, electric cars are cheaper, but not necessarily, I say.
Okay, let me just jump in with two more trends before I answer the question.
Please do.
Younger people, and we're in downtown Toronto right now, in the middle of, you know, Union Station is nearby, so there's lots of transit options. Young people who are moving to the city, first of all, might not be able to afford a car.
Right.
They certainly can't afford to buy a parking stall in an underground condominium building for, let's say, on average, $80,000 a pop. And even people who are getting a little bit older, who are retiring. That
How come you're looking at me when you say that?
Okay, I'll look out there. Are there any older people out there? There are people who are coming from the suburbs back to Toronto, and they say, you know, I have options like ride sharing, Uber, Lyft.
Yeah, I don't need a car.
Cooling. I don't need a car. Now, there will be still lots of vehicles on the road, and if we're getting into that situation, they'll still be putting a lot of wear and tear on our streets. But your point, we're not collecting the revenue from gas taxes.
We're not collecting the revenue.
So one of the solutions that was put forward by Harry Kitchen, and many others, quite frankly, is road pricing. So charge people by the distance they travel on our roads. And with the cars around that we see in the auto show today, they're essentially computers on wheels.
They are.
They're loaded with technology.
So
it's going to be possible to measure the distance people are traveling, what time of day. So let's say you're going up the Don Valley Parkway or the Gardiner at 3 in the morning. Your charge, because you're not, you know, creating any congestion, should be very low. However, if you decide to go north on the DVP at 5 in the afternoon, your rate per kilometer is probably going to be a little bit higher.
Right. Now, are you suggesting, though, that it doesn't matter whether the rate is low, that at some point in the future, regardless of whether we drive a hydrogen car or an electrified car or an internal combustion engine car, we're going to be being charged to use those roads?
As a matter of fairness, and I'll ask the rhetorical question, if you're an EV driver, you're not buying any gas, so that you're not contributing any revenues that typically go into infrastructure funds. So
I can understand that, but if I'm driving my Ford F-150 pickup, and I've, you know, spent $100 to fill the tank, of which $60 is tax, am I still going to have to pay to use that road?
Here's one solution. It's being worked on in Oregon right now. So Oregon has been doing pilot tests. Right now there's a test with 5,000 people who own vehicles. They will pay for the miles they travel, but they'll get a rebate on the gas taxes. So there's an incentive, and most people are ending up with a net benefit.
You know what? Now look, I have never heard of anybody having a net benefit when it has anything to do with government. Sorry. I know what you're saying.
I'm from the government, trust me.
I know. Yeah, I'm here.
And I'm not, by the way.
And I'm here to help you. Yeah. The worst words that anybody will ever hear. Be that as it may, I was just giving you a hard time. I do know, for example, in the state of Virginia, you buy an electric car, and essentially they send you a bill for $300 or $250.
A rebate.
Yeah, that you then have to pay for not buying gasoline. So that they're going to at least maintain a level of revenue that they're used to, which you know has its good points and its bad points, I suppose. I guess my other question, going back to the Oregon situation though, is how do they figure this out? Do they, for example, trust you to tell them? You know, even today, when we go to renew our license plates, it wants to know what's on your odometer. So somebody somewhere is saying, somebody's driving that F-150 for X number of kilometers a year or whatever. But they're trusting me.
In Oregon right now, it's a plug-in device, so it's onboard telematics is the official phrase. People who are concerned about their privacy, which is a big issue in our world right now, they do have the option to provide the information manually, so there's a trust level there. But they are looking at, you know, we all have smartphones or those sorts of devices right now. So Oregon and other states around them like Washington, California, who are talking about, can we have our 3 states together do this bigger pilot project? They're talking about how can we use technology better to figure out the time of day you travel and the distance you travel.
Right.
And the types of roads you travel on.
And that was actually going to be my next question, which is you kind of started to answer it there. You know, the one state that seems to drive so much of this is California.
Absolutely.
And so I was waiting to hear California in here because I'm sure they have some ideas of what to do. Or is it that they're so gung-ho to get everybody out of, you know, fossil fuel burning vehicles and into electric cars that they don't care yet about the loss of revenue?
Well, even going back to a Republican governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Right.
he was very keen on doing the right thing with respect to taking climate action.
He was a Democrat in
Well,
disguise.
whatever.
In disguise, you know.
There's examples in the U.S. of Republican states and Democratic states that have road pricing. Now, not every single solution may work for
Right.
Toronto. One option that we're seeing in over 30 U.S. states right now in one form or another is something called hot lanes. So that's a high occupancy toll lane.
Right.
So you take what we have right now with our HOV lanes,
Right.
and if someone who's a single occupant driver wishes to drive on that to save
Right.
some time, they're going to pay. One option might be to extend it all the way up to 404 to 407 and ask the
Right.
407, like the province did with 407 East, can we use your transponders to do a pilot? Let's check it out.
You know something? I think that that's probably a good idea. And frankly, even though I'm a driver and I take the side of drivers most of the time, I really do think that sometimes the revenue situation becomes sufficiently critical that road tolls are really not that bad an idea.
Yeah.
As long as there's some way to even out the pain over as much of the population as you can.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure that it's fair to have the people who can afford to drive cars being paid for, paying for just about everything. Now,
By the way, this is not a testimonial for the 407 or anything like that.
Right.
But
That's okay.
Despite the very high charges per kilometer, the number of drivers on that piece of infrastructure, including truck drivers, is growing a little bit. I think they're 10 to 12% are trucks now, in addition to the cars that are there. So people are speaking with their wallets and their cars, saying, I'm going to take it to save time.
Absolutely, because time is money. And actually, I'm surprised it's taken as long for the trucks to start to use that.
They do have a higher rate per kilometer.
Well, I know they do.
Yeah.
And anyway, we can talk about. I'm a fan of the 407. I'm a fan of the New York Thruway. I'm a fan of toll roads, period, because they're going to get me from A to B a lot faster.
You've changed your position over the last 3 years.
I go whichever way the wind blows,
Okay, Norris.
You kind of have to have a sense of what's going on out there,
Which way is the wind blowing?
And that's why I say the first thing I do in the morning is read the editorial page of the Toronto Star to find out what I'm supposed to think that day, right?
Absolutely.
Because, you have to go with the times. Anyway, very quickly, do you know of any other experiments that are taking, we've talked about kind of paying per kilometer or mile. We've talked about a flat, you have an electric car, here's your bill for $300 a year or whatever it is. Is there any other way that you can see that they might be able to recover some of this revenue in a fair fashion? But it's
sure. Yeah. I'll give you one example, but there's many others. So London has a congestion charge.
Sure.
There's a zone around the downtown area. If you pass through that zone, you're going to pay. It's a very steep charge.
Right.
That money has gone back into transportation in the London area.
Right.
So it's being put to good use.
And you know something? Okay, now this might be a little bit, we might be moving a bit to the left here, or the right, because I'm not sure that this is a political thought. But, you just hit the nail on the head about one thing there. We talk about congestion, and there's no doubt about the fact that we have to do something about the congestion. But is a charge the right way to do it, or do we try to convince people to leave the car at home and take public transit? But on the basis of it's more efficient and it's faster.
Okay. Well, our former premier, you may remember Kathleen Wynne.
Right.
She was approached by John Tory, who wanted to put tolls on the Gardiner and the
I know.
DVP. and she started hearing grief from drivers in the suburbs 905 in particular,
Right,
saying
right.
we don't want to pay. I think, part of it was that the premier said there's not enough transit choice right now for me to allow this to go ahead. So
Right.
we certainly are working to build up our subway and LRT and BRT,
Right.
bus rapid transit infrastructure. So there will be more choice.
Well, I was going to say, you represent construction, you represent contractors.
We're going to build it all no matter what.
Well, yeah, but you know something? By the next century, the way things seem to go around here, I can't understand why something isn't happening every day of the year somewhere. And, yes, we have the crosstown, but there's nothing else. I mean, there's a lot being planned.
Yes.
But there are not more shovels in the ground, and I just don't quite understand why there isn't more of an efficiency.
Well, I think in your backyard, Mississauga is doing the Hurontario LRT.
I know.
That's getting going, I think.
Well, we can talk about that, but you know what? We should.
That would be another show.
We shouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say they're going to draw they're going to give away a couple of cars momentarily over at the Rock the Raffle.
So I need to get my ticket in there then.
Well, actually, no, you can't. They're
Oh.
sold out,
Oh, okay.
believe it or not. It's been very successful this year, but there's 2 cars over there. Who knows? Maybe one person could win both cars, or, they're spreading the wealth out. But I want to thank you very much, Andy.
Thank
for
you,
coming
North.
down
Really appreciate it.
Today, watch the hand. And, and this is Norris McDonald for Auto Show Live, and we will be back later on this afternoon with another discussion and another subject. See you then.